Jacob, a central figure in the Old Testament, was born into a family of promise and destiny. His life is a compelling story of struggle, transformation, and divine intervention. As the son of Isaac and the grandson of Abraham, Jacob was part of a lineage blessed by God, holding the covenant that promised to make them a great nation. Yet, despite these blessings, his journey was far from smooth. His very name, Jacob, meaning heel grabber or supplanter, foreshadowed the conflict that would define much of his early years. From the moment he entered the world, grasping his twin brother Esau's heel, his life would be marked by rivalry and tension. Growing up, Jacob's relationship with his brother Esau was contentious, to say the least. The Bible recounts how Jacob, with the encouragement of his mother Rebekah, deceived his father Isaac into giving him the blessing meant for Esau, the firstborn. This act of deception not only created a deep rift between the brothers, but also set Jacob on a path of exile and separation from his family. He fled to his uncle Laban's household, where he would face his own share of trickery and hardships. It's during this period that Jacob's character began to shift as he encountered God in great ways. One of the most significant encounters was at Bethel, where God reaffirmed the covenant made to Abraham and Isaac, promising Jacob that his descendants would become as numerous as the dust of the earth. Before we move forward with Jacob's story, I want to take a moment to say, if you're enjoying this biblical history, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue producing educational content rooted in Scripture, and we'd love for you to join our community of learners and seekers. Click the subscribe button and don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. As Jacob's life unfolded, it became clear that he was not just a man marked by struggle, but also one destined for transformation. After years of laboring under his uncle Laban, Jacob sought to return home, yearning to make peace with his estranged brother. This desire for reconciliation is emblematic of his internal growth. Moving from a deceiver to a man willing to face the consequences of his past actions. On his way back, he encountered God again, this time in the form of a mysterious man with whom Jacob wrestled throughout the night. This wrestling match was more than just a physical struggle. It was a symbolic representation of Jacob's lifelong battle with his identity and his place in God's plan. At the end of the night, God blessed him and gave him a new name, Israel, which means he who struggles with God. This name change signified not just a new identity, but also a new destiny. Jacob was no longer just a man who took what belonged to others. He was now a man chosen by God to father a nation. Jacob's 12 sons are more than just names listed in the genealogies of the Bible. They represent the foundation upon which the tribes of Israel were built. Each son, by his birth order and mother, played a role in shaping the narrative of Jacob's family, and their collective identities would eventually define the nation of Israel. The 12 tribes of Israel bear their names, and their legacies are reflected in the blessings and prophecies given by both Jacob and Moses. To understand their significance, we must first recognize that each son not only contributed to the physical growth of Israel, but also symbolized distinct characteristics, strengths, and challenges that shaped the identity of the nation. The 12 sons were born to Jacob by 4 women, his 2 wives, Leah and Rachel, and their maidservants, Bilhah and Zilpah. This complex family structure set the stage for rivalries and divisions, creating a unique dynamic in which each son struggled for recognition and favor. Leah, who was less loved by Jacob, bore him 6 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife, had 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, gave birth to Dan and Naphtali, while Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, bore Gad and Asher. These 12 men were the forefathers of the tribes that would settle and define the territories of the Promised Land. The significance of these sons goes beyond their familial connections. In many ways, they represented the varied aspects of human nature and the spectrum of experiences found in any large family. There were moments of courage and leadership, as well as episodes of deceit and betrayal. The interactions between the brothers not only set the tone for their relationships, but also symbolized the internal conflicts that would later be seen between the tribes. These early rivalries and alliances foreshadowed the political and spiritual struggles that the tribes of Israel would face as they developed into a nation. Although all 12 were sons of Jacob, not all held equal status or received the same blessings. Reuben, as the firstborn, was entitled to the birthright and a double portion of inheritance. However, his actions disqualified him from that privilege, and leadership passed to others. Simeon and Levi, known for their fierce tempers, lost their position due to acts of violence. Judah, despite being the fourth born, rose to a place of prominence and leadership, becoming the tribe from which King David and ultimately Jesus Christ would descend. Joseph, favored by his father, was given a special blessing that extended to his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, creating a unique situation in which his descendants formed two tribes. Benjamin, the youngest, was the last to receive his father's blessing, and his tribe would become known for its fierce warriors. Each of these sons represents a facet of the complex spiritual and social fabric that God used to establish his people. Their strengths and weaknesses, along with the roles they played in the unfolding of God's plan, are lessons in faith, obedience, and the consequences of human actions. Some were given blessings of leadership, others received warnings of strife and struggle, but all were destined to form the nation that would carry forward the covenant God made with Abraham. Through these 12 men, the family of Jacob grew into a nation that would later be called to be a light to the nations. Understanding the roles of Jacob's sons is crucial for grasping the broader narrative of the Old Testament. The structure and division of the tribes would influence the history of Israel for centuries. Each tribe developed its own identity, strengths, and challenges, and their collective story is interwoven with the rise and fall of Israel as a kingdom. The prophecies and blessings given to each son by Jacob and later by Moses were not just predictions of their individual fates, but also declarations of the character and destiny of the tribes that would bear their names. The number 12 itself carries a symbolic meaning in biblical theology. It signifies completeness and order, and it is often associated with the fulfillment of God's promises. The 12 sons, therefore, are not merely a matter of lineage. They are a representation of God's plan for his people. This symbolism is echoed throughout Scripture, from the 12 tribes of Israel to the 12 disciples of Jesus, and even to the 12 gates of the New Jerusalem described in the book of Revelation. Each son's place in the family was intentional, and each tribe's role in the history of Israel was divinely ordained to reflect a greater spiritual reality. Now that we have established who the 12 sons are, it's time to go into their individual characteristics and the specific blessings they received. Reuben, the firstborn son of Jacob and his wife Leah. As the first son, Reuben held a privileged position in the family. In the culture of the time, the firstborn's status came with distinct rights and responsibilities, often referred to as the birthright. This included a double portion of the inheritance, leadership over his brothers, and the expectation that he would carry forward the family legacy. However, Reuben's story is one of lost potential, as a single grave mistake overshadowed his birthright and led to his eventual fall from favor. From the very beginning, Reuben seemed destined for greatness. As Leah's firstborn, he was a source of pride for his mother, who longed for Jacob's affection. His name, meaning "behold a son," reflects Leah's hope that his birth would secure her place in Jacob's heart. Throughout his youth, Reuben likely took his position seriously, knowing the weight of expectation on his shoulders. The Bible describes him as a man who initially showed signs of responsibility and leadership. For instance, when his brothers plotted to kill their younger brother Joseph out of jealousy, it was Reuben who intervened. He urged them not to shed blood, suggesting instead that they throw Joseph into a pit, secretly intending to rescue him later. This act, though imperfect, was a reflection of Reuben's desire to protect his family and prevent unnecessary violence. Yet, despite these glimpses of nobility, Reuben's story took a dark turn due to an incident that would forever alter his standing in the family. One day, in a moment of recklessness and disrespect, Reuben made the fateful decision to sleep with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and the mother of two of his brothers, Dan and Naphtali. This act of betrayal was not just a moral failure. It was a grievous offense against his father and a direct challenge to Jacob's authority. In the ancient world, such behavior was seen as a power move, an attempt to assert dominance over one's father by claiming his concubine. But for Reuben, this was not an act of strength. It was a catastrophic lapse in judgment that exposed his instability and lack of self-control. Jacob, though he did not confront Reuben immediately, was deeply hurt and angered by this betrayal. The incident created a permanent rift between father and son, one that would not be mended. Reuben's actions were more than just a personal sin. They were an affront to the family's honor and disrupted the natural order. By taking Bilhah, Reuben demonstrated not only a lack of respect for his father, but also a disregard for the responsibility that came with being the firstborn. The Bible does not provide much detail about Reuben's thoughts or motivations during this period, but his silence in the narrative that follows suggests a deep sense of guilt and regret. Unlike some of his brothers, Reuben never attempts to defend his actions or justify his behavior. He seems to disappear into the background, overshadowed by the more vocal and active brothers like Judah and Joseph. His fall from grace was not marked by a dramatic confrontation, but rather by a slow, quiet fading of his influence and status. Years later, when Jacob gathered his sons to bless them before his death, he finally addressed Reuben's transgression. In Genesis 49, Jacob's words to Reuben are harsh and heartbreaking. "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Unstable as water, you shall not excel because you went up to your father's bed. Then you defiled it. He went up to my couch." These words capture the tragedy of Reuben's story. Despite being Jacob's firstborn and a man of great potential, his instability and lack of restraint rendered him unfit for leadership. The phrase "unstable as water" is particularly striking. Water, though essential for life, is also unpredictable and without form. It can be a force of destruction when uncontrolled. Similarly, Reuben's character, though showing promise, lacked the steadiness and strength needed to lead. He had the passion and energy of water, but none of the discipline to channel it productively. His failure was not just in a single act of sin, but in his overall inability to live up to the expectations placed upon him. Reuben's relationship with his father never fully recovered. Although he remained part of the family and continued to live among his brothers, his status was irrevocably diminished. Jacob's final words to him were not a curse, but they were a clear declaration that the rights of the firstborn would no longer belong to him. The leadership and blessing passed on to his brothers, particularly Judah and Joseph. For Reuben, this meant a life marked by what might have been, a story of lost opportunities and unfulfilled potential. Reuben's story, though tragic, serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of character and integrity. He began with every advantage: the firstborn status, a father's love, and a position of leadership. Yet, in a moment of weakness, he sacrificed all of it. His downfall was not due to a lack of strength or ability, but rather due to a lack of self-discipline and wisdom. Reuben's life stands as a warning that even the greatest potential can be undone by a single act of recklessness. Simeon, the second son of Jacob and Leah, was born after his older brother Reuben. His name, Simeon, is derived from the Hebrew word meaning heard, reflecting Leah's belief that God had heard her cries for love and recognition from Jacob. Like his brother Reuben, Simeon's story starts with promise, but becomes marked by impulsive actions and a fierce temper. He was a man driven by strong emotions, and these emotions would lead him into actions that had serious consequences, not just for himself, but for his family and future generations. Simeon's temperament and nature are most vividly displayed in one of the earliest and most violent episodes recorded in the Bible involving Jacob's sons, the massacre at Shechem. The event began with Dinah, Jacob's only daughter and Simeon's sister, being defiled by Shechem, the prince of the land. Shechem, smitten with Dinah, sought to marry her after the assault, and his father, Hamor, approached Jacob to propose an alliance between their families. Simeon and Levi, Dinah's full brothers, were furious at the dishonor done to their sister. They believed that such a heinous act demanded more than just a negotiated marriage. It demanded justice, swift and severe. Feigning agreement, Simeon and Levi tricked Hamor and Shechem by suggesting that they would consent to the marriage if every male in the city of Shechem were circumcised. The men of Shechem, eager for the alliance, agreed and underwent the painful procedure. On the third day, when the men were still weakened from the circumcision, Simeon and Levi took their swords and attacked. With ruthless precision, they slaughtered every male in the city, including Shechem and his father Hamor. They then plundered the city, taking its women, children, and possessions as spoils. This act of vengeance shocked not only the people of the region, but also their own father, Jacob. When Jacob learned what his sons had done, he rebuked them sharply, saying, "You have brought trouble on me by making me a stench to the inhabitants of the land. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed." But Simeon and Levi were unapologetic. Their response was cold and defiant. "Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute?" This exchange reveals the depth of Simeon's anger and his unyielding sense of honor, but it also highlights his inability to foresee the broader consequences of his actions. In this moment, Simeon's fury overshadowed his judgment. His sense of justice, though understandable, was disproportionate, turning into a brutal massacre that tainted his reputation and cast a shadow over his future. Jacob's fear was not misplaced. Such a violent act could have easily incited neighboring tribes to retaliate. It was only by God's intervention that the surrounding peoples were struck with fear, and Jacob's family escaped retribution. But while Simeon and Levi escaped immediate consequences, their father never forgot what they had done. Unlike Reuben's fall from grace, which stemmed from a personal moral failure, Simeon's downfall was rooted in unchecked rage and a desire for revenge. His zeal for protecting his sister's honor led him to commit an atrocity that stained his family's name. Jacob, though deeply disappointed, did not immediately strip Simeon of his rights. However, the consequences of his actions would surface much later, during Jacob's final blessings on his sons. After the massacre, Simeon's presence in the narrative diminishes, but his fiery nature and tendency toward conflict do not disappear entirely. He continued to exhibit a streak of cruelty and impulsiveness, which played out again in his treatment of his younger brother Joseph. Simeon, along with the other brothers, harbored deep resentment toward Joseph, fueled by jealousy over their father's favoritism and the dreams Joseph shared of one day ruling over them. When the brothers saw an opportunity to rid themselves of Joseph, it was Simeon who was one of the more vocal instigators. Though Reuben tried to spare Joseph's life, suggesting they throw him into a pit instead of killing him outright, Simeon was among those who decided to sell Joseph into slavery, sealing his fate and lying to their father about his supposed death. Simeon's role in this betrayal further revealed his harsh and callous nature. It also deepened the division within the family, a rift that would only begin to heal many years later when Joseph, now a powerful ruler in Egypt, confronted his brothers. When the famine drove Jacob's sons to seek grain in Egypt, it was Simeon whom Joseph chose to imprison as collateral while the other brothers returned to Canaan. This was not a random choice. Simeon's past actions had singled him out. Joseph's decision to hold Simeon captive was, in a sense, a form of poetic justice for his role in selling Joseph into slavery years earlier. Throughout these events, Simeon's life is a portrait of a man whose emotions consistently clouded his judgment. His devotion to family honor and loyalty, though admirable in some respects, was always expressed through violence and vengeance. He was a man who acted first and thought later, driven by a desire to assert control in situations where he felt his family's dignity was threatened. This fiery nature made him a dangerous ally and a fearsome enemy. Simeon's defining flaw was not just his capacity for anger, but his inability to temper that anger with wisdom and restraint. Unlike his brothers, who despite their flaws, showed growth and transformation, Simeon's story is one of rigidity. He remained the same impulsive, hot-tempered man from the beginning, unable or unwilling to learn from his mistakes. His intense need for retribution ultimately cost him the trust and respect of his father, and his reputation as a man of bloodshed followed him for the rest of his days. Levi, the third son of Jacob and Leah, was a man defined by intensity and passion. Along with his older brother Simeon, Levi played a significant role in one of the darkest chapters of Jacob's family history, the massacre at Shechem. His story is one marked by violence, but also by a surprising transformation that led his descendants to take on a unique and sacred role in Israel's history. Unlike his brother Simeon, whose anger led only to disgrace, Levi's fervor, though initially destructive, would later be redirected and redeemed for a higher purpose. Levi's early life is closely intertwined with that of Simeon, and together the two brothers were known for their fierce tempers and unflinching loyalty to family. This loyalty, however, manifested itself in brutal ways. Their most infamous act was the retaliation against Shechem and his people. After their sister Dinah was defiled by Shechem, the prince of the land, Simeon and Levi took justice into their own hands. Fueled by outrage and a desire to avenge their sister's honor, they hatched a deceitful plan, pretending to agree to a marriage proposal from Shechem's father, Hamor. They stipulated that every male in the city must be circumcised before any union could take place. Once the men of Shechem complied and were weakened by the procedure, Levi and Simeon took their swords and slaughtered every male in the city. The massacre at Shechem was an act of calculated brutality. It wasn't just about avenging Dinah, it was about making a statement. The brothers looted the city, seized women and children as captives, and took all the livestock and possessions. Levi, in particular, seemed driven by a zealous desire to restore his family's honor, regardless of the cost. But in doing so, he crossed a line that permanently altered his standing with his father, Jacob. When Jacob learned of the massacre, he was horrified and furious. Instead of feeling pride for the vengeance exacted, Jacob felt shame and fear. He rebuked Simeon and Levi, saying, "You have made me a stench to the people of this land. I and my household might be destroyed." Levi, however, did not express remorse. Like Simeon, he believed that his actions were justified and necessary. Their fierce response reflected a deeply ingrained sense of family loyalty and honor. But it also revealed a dangerous lack of control. In Levi's eyes, defending his sister's honor was worth any risk, even if it meant defying his father and endangering his entire family. This single-minded zeal defined Levi's early years and cast a shadow over his legacy. Jacob's disappointment in Levi became painfully evident years later when he delivered his final blessings to his sons. Instead of offering words of praise or promise, Jacob issued a stark condemnation. "Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are weapons of violence. Let me not enter their council. Let me not join their assembly, for they have killed men in their anger and hamstrung oxen as they pleased. Cursed be their anger so fierce and their fury so cruel. I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel." With these words, Jacob effectively disqualified Levi from any leadership role among his brothers, and prophesied that his descendants would be divided and scattered throughout the land. Levi's anger, though sincere in its motivation, was condemned because it was untamed and destructive. His temperament made him a liability, not just to himself, but to the entire family. While his zeal could have been a force for good, without wisdom and restraint, it led only to bloodshed and chaos. This condemnation seemed to seal Levi's fate, and for a time his story appeared to be one of wasted potential and shattered hopes. Yet Levi's story did not end in disgrace. Unlike Simeon, who continued on a path of conflict and obscurity, Levi's intense nature was eventually transformed and redirected toward a sacred purpose. The turning point for Levi's descendants came generations later, under the leadership of Moses. During the Israelites' wilderness journey, the tribe of Levi made a decisive choice that changed their destiny. When the people of Israel sinned by worshiping the golden calf at Mount Sinai, it was the tribe of Levi who rallied to Moses' side, standing against the idolatry and executing God's judgment on those who had rebelled. This act of zeal for God's holiness mirrored the fierce passion Levi had shown earlier, but this time it was channeled in a way that aligned with divine purposes. Because of their loyalty to God and their willingness to stand for righteousness, the Levites were set apart for a special role in Israel's worship. Moses declared, "You have been set apart to the Lord today, for you were against your own sons and brothers, and he has blessed you this day." This marked the beginning of a dramatic transformation in the legacy of Levi's tribe. Instead of being known for violence and bloodshed, the Levites were consecrated to serve as priests and caretakers of the tabernacle. They became the tribe responsible for teaching the law, offering sacrifices, and maintaining the sanctity of Israel's worship. Thus, Levi's story, though initially one of shame and condemnation, became a story of redemption. His descendants, despite the curse spoken by Jacob, rose to become the spiritual leaders of the nation. While the tribe of Levi was indeed scattered and had no inheritance of land like the other tribes, they were given something far more significant: the privilege of serving directly in God's presence. The scattering that Jacob prophesied was fulfilled not as a punishment, but as a means of placing Levites among all the tribes of Israel to teach and uphold the law. Levi's life is a powerful testament to the dual-edged nature of zeal. When left unchecked, his passion led to violence and destruction. But when refined and directed toward God's purposes, it became a source of strength and service. Judah, the fourth son of Jacob and Leah, holds a unique and prominent place in the biblical narrative. His story is one of transformation. From a man marked by serious moral failures to a figure of leadership and redemption. Unlike his older brothers, Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, whose impulsive actions led to their downfall, Judah's journey is one of growth and change, making him an emblem of the power of repentance and the potential for redemption. From his birth, Judah's position in the family was somewhat overshadowed. As the fourth son, he had no immediate expectation of leadership or birthright privileges, which traditionally went to the firstborn. Yet, he was born into a family filled with rivalry and tension. Leah named him Judah, meaning praise, as an expression of gratitude to God after years of struggling to earn her husband Jacob's affection. Judah's early life, like his brothers, was shaped by the complicated dynamics between his parents and the intense competition for Jacob's attention. Judah's first significant appearance in the biblical narrative is during the story of Joseph, when the jealousy and resentment of the brothers boiled over. Joseph, their younger brother and the favorite son of Jacob, had repeatedly provoked them with dreams in which he reigned supreme over them. The brothers' envy turned to hatred, and they conspired to kill him. However, it was Judah who stepped forward and proposed an alternative. Rather than shedding Joseph's blood and having to live with the guilt, they should sell him to passing Ishmaelite traders. He reasoned, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His suggestion was pragmatic and profitable, yet it was still an act of betrayal that set in motion years of pain and separation for their father and younger brother. Judah's decision to sell Joseph instead of killing him, while appearing less violent, was not born out of compassion, but rather convenience. It marked the beginning of a series of moral missteps that would haunt him. After selling Joseph, the brothers concocted a cruel lie, presenting Joseph's blood-stained robe to their father and allowing him to believe that his beloved son had been killed by a wild animal. Judah, along with his brothers, stood by and watched as their father's grief consumed him. For many years, Judah carried the weight of this deceit, knowing he had played a central role in Joseph's suffering and Jacob's heartbreak. Following this incident, Judah's life took a personal and painful turn. The Bible briefly shifts focus to a chapter that reveals much about Judah's character and his path to redemption. After the events with Joseph, Judah left his brothers and settled in Canaan, marrying a Canaanite woman. He had 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. But tragedy soon struck. His eldest son, was described as wicked in the eyes of the Lord and was struck down, leaving his wife, Tamar, a widow. According to the custom of levirate marriage, Judah instructed his second son, Onan, to marry Tamar and produce an heir for his deceased brother. Onan, however, refused to fulfill this duty, and the Lord punished him as well, leaving Tamar twice widowed and childless. Fearing for the life of his youngest son, Shelah, Judah withheld him from Tamar, breaking his promise to provide her with a husband. This act of neglect left Tamar in a vulnerable position, without a husband or children, a dire situation in ancient times. But Tamar, determined to secure her rights and continue the family line, devised a daring plan. Disguising herself as a prostitute, she waited by the roadside until Judah came by. Not recognizing her, Judah approached her and offered payment for her services, unaware that he was sealing his own fate. When Tamar later revealed that she was pregnant, Judah, not knowing the child was his, condemned her to death for immorality. But in a dramatic confrontation, Tamar presented Judah's seal, cord, and staff, items he had given as a pledge during their encounter. Suddenly faced with his own hypocrisy, Judah was forced to confront the reality of his actions. In a moment of remarkable honesty, he declared, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." This confession marked a turning point for Judah. For the first time, he acknowledged his wrongdoing openly and took responsibility for his actions. This encounter with Tamar was pivotal in Judah's life. It was a moment of deep personal failure, but also of humility and repentance. Judah's willingness to admit his sin and recognize Tamar's righteousness demonstrated a change in his character. From this point on, Judah began to emerge as a different man, one who understood the weight of his choices and the necessity of integrity. Judah's transformation became evident years later when famine drove Jacob's family to seek food in Egypt, where an unexpected reunion awaited them. By this time, Joseph, whom they had sold into slavery, had risen to power as the governor of Egypt. When the brothers arrived, not recognizing Joseph, they pleaded for grain. Unaware that their fate now lay in the hands of the brother they had betrayed, Joseph, testing his brothers, demanded that they bring Benjamin, the youngest and most beloved son, back to Egypt as proof of their honesty. This demand put Judah in a difficult position. Years earlier, he had willingly sold Joseph into slavery. Now, he was faced with the prospect of losing another brother, one whom his father dearly loved. Judah, however, stepped forward and made a surprising offer. He promised his father that he would personally guarantee Benjamin's safety, saying, "I myself will be surety for him. You can hold me responsible forever if I do not bring him back." This was not the same Judah who had callously sold his brother years earlier. He was now a man willing to sacrifice himself to protect his family. When Joseph, still concealing his identity, orchestrated a scheme to make it appear as though Benjamin had stolen a valuable cup, it was Judah who stepped forward to plead for his brother's life. In one of the most moving speeches in the Bible, Judah offered himself as a slave in place of Benjamin, saying, "Please let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers." His words were filled with concern for his father's suffering and remorse for his past actions. It was a moment of complete self-sacrifice and demonstrated the depth of his transformation. This act of intercession was what finally broke Joseph's resolve. Seeing his brother's willingness to lay down his life for Benjamin, Joseph revealed his true identity and forgave his brothers. Judah's willingness to stand in the gap for Benjamin was a stark contrast to his earlier betrayal of Joseph. It was a sign that he had truly changed and was now capable of the leadership and compassion that Jacob's family so desperately needed. Judah's journey is one of the most powerful examples of personal redemption in the Bible. He began as a man willing to sell his brother and deceive his father, but through painful trials and hard-won repentance, he emerged as a leader willing to sacrifice himself for others. His story is a testament to the transformative power of humility and the ability to change, even after great failures. It's no wonder that Judah's line was chosen for kingship, as he became the ancestor of King David and ultimately the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Judah received a far different blessing. "Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion he crouches and lies down, like a lioness who dares to rouse him. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his." This blessing signaled Judah's rise to leadership and dominance among his brothers. Jacob foresaw Judah's descendants taking on a royal role, symbolized by the lion, the king of beasts. The reference to the scepter hinted at the line of kings that would come from Judah, culminating in King David, and ultimately in the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Judah's tribe would become the leader of the southern kingdom and the heart of Israel's spiritual and political life. Dan, the fifth son of Jacob, was the firstborn of Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant. His name, which means to judge, was chosen by Rachel, reflecting her hope that God had judged her plight and granted her a son through her servant. Rachel's choice to name him Dan was filled with longing and expectation, as she was struggling with her own barrenness at the time. Dan's birth gave her a sense of victory in the intense rivalry with her sister Leah. However, the symbolism behind Dan's name would play out in unexpected ways in his life and the history of his descendants. Dan's role in the family was unique. Born to a concubine, he lacked the status and privilege of Leah and Rachel's sons. Yet despite his lower standing, he is described as one who would judge his people, hinting at a sense of responsibility and authority. However, his story in the Bible is limited, and most of what we know about him comes from the prophecies given by his father Jacob and later by Moses. One of the most intriguing aspects of Dan's character is found in Jacob's blessing in Genesis 49, where he says, "Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels so that its rider falls backward." This blessing is puzzling and ominous, filled with symbolism that suggests both strength and treachery. The image of Dan as a serpent, sly and dangerous, reflects a darker side of his nature, one that would eventually manifest in the history of his tribe. While being called to a role of leadership, Dan also became a symbol of deception. The tribe of Dan, although initially positioned to judge and protect Israel, later fell into idolatry and moral compromise, introducing idol worship into the land. Dan's story, though brief, serves as a warning about the dangers of using power without integrity. His tribe's descent into idolatry would become a stain on their legacy, marking them as a tribe that turned away from God's path. The imagery of the serpent foreshadows the tribe's future struggles, showing that without wisdom and righteousness, even those called to judge can become instruments of destruction. Naphtali was the sixth son of Jacob, born through Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, and thus Dan's full brother. His name means "my struggle," chosen by Rachel to reflect the intense competition she felt with her sister Leah. Rachel, still barren and desperate to bear children of her own, viewed Naphtali's birth as a personal victory in her ongoing contest with Leah. The name carried the sense of wrestling, reflecting both Rachel's emotional struggle and the hope that Naphtali's birth signaled God's favor. Unlike some of his brothers, Naphtali's story in the Bible is relatively peaceful and uneventful. There are no records of him participating in significant family conflicts, nor is there a dramatic tale of failure or redemption associated with him. Instead, the focus shifts to his characteristics and the unique traits attributed to his descendants. Jacob's blessing for Naphtali is short but filled with imagery. Naphtali is a doe let loose. He gives beautiful words. This image of a free, graceful doe suggests swiftness, agility, and freedom, qualities that were highly valued in the ancient world. The blessing also mentions beautiful words, hinting at eloquence and possibly a gift for communication. While many of the other sons are portrayed as warriors, leaders, or laborers, Naphtali's blessing is one of creativity and expression. The combination of grace and speech points to a more gentle nature, one focused on sharing joy and wisdom rather than conquering or judging. Naphtali's story represents a balance within Jacob's family. He is not remembered for his strength or his deeds in battle, but rather for his ability to move freely and express himself. His tribe, known for their speed and bravery, would eventually settle in the fertile land near the Sea of Galilee, an area noted for its beauty and abundance. While some of the other tribes struggled with internal conflict and outside threats, the tribe of Naphtali enjoyed a certain degree of freedom and stability, reflecting the peaceful nature suggested by Jacob's blessing. Gad, the seventh son of Jacob, was the firstborn of Zilpah, Leah's maidservant. His birth was met with joy by Leah, who declared, "What good fortune!" Gad's name is derived from the Hebrew word for good fortune, or troop, reflecting Leah's delight at having yet another son to strengthen her position in the ongoing competition with Rachel. Gad's name, signifying a troop, would prove prophetic, as his descendants became known for their military prowess and courage in battle. Gad's story, like Naphtali's, is relatively quiet in terms of individual actions or dramatic conflicts. However, his legacy is defined by strength and resilience. Jacob's blessing to Gad is brief but powerful. Gad, a troop shall tramp upon him, but he shall triumph at last. This blessing paints a picture of a tribe that would face adversity and attack, but ultimately, Gad's people would endure and overcome their enemies. The repetition of the word troop emphasizes the martial nature of his tribe, which became known as fierce and tenacious warriors. The tribe of Gad settled on the east side of the Jordan River, in a region that left them vulnerable to attacks from outside forces. This location meant that Gad's descendants had to be constantly vigilant and ready to defend their territory. As a result, they developed a reputation for bravery and skill in combat, often acting as the frontline defenders for the rest of Israel. The men of Gad were described as valiant and mighty warriors, capable of holding their own against overwhelming odds. Gad's story, though lacking in dramatic personal details, is a testament to endurance and strength. He may not have had the leadership qualities of Judah or the spiritual role of Levi, but Gad's contribution to the family and nation of Israel was his unwavering resolve and courage. He and his descendants stood firm in the face of adversity, embodying the very meaning of his name, a troop that would fight to the end and prevail. Asher, the eighth son of Jacob and the second born to Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, was welcomed into the world with a name that means happy or blessed. Leah chose the name, proclaiming, "How happy I am! The women will call me happy." Asher's name reflected Leah's joy at bearing another son for Jacob, strengthening her position in the family rivalry with Rachel. Unlike some of his brothers, whose names were steeped in struggle or conflict, Asher's name carried a sense of joy and contentment from the very beginning. Asher's role in the biblical narrative is relatively understated compared to his more prominent brothers, but the blessings he received were extraordinary. Jacob's blessing over Asher is one of the most positive among his sons. Asher's food will be rich. He will provide delicacies fit for a king. This blessing suggests abundance, prosperity, and a life filled with the finest things. Asher is portrayed as a man of peace and plenty, someone whose descendants would dwell in fertile lands, producing an abundance of food and resources. Later, Moses' blessing over the tribe of Asher further reinforced these themes. He declared, "Most blessed of sons is Asher. Let him be favored by his brothers, and let him dip his foot in oil." This imagery of dipping his foot in oil likely alludes to the prosperity and richness of the land that the tribe would inherit. Asher's territory, located in the lush, fertile region of Canaan along the Mediterranean coast, was known for its olive groves, vineyards, and fertile soil. The land became synonymous with prosperity and high-quality produce, making the tribe a provider not just for themselves, but also for others. Asher's story, though not marked by dramatic incidents, is a reminder that God's blessings can manifest in peaceful and fruitful living. His descendants enjoyed the good things of the land, embodying the happiness and abundance that his name signified. Unlike other tribes, who were known for their struggles and wars, Asher's legacy was one of contentment and joy, enriching the lives of those around them. Issachar, the ninth son of Jacob and Leah, was born under circumstances that highlighted Leah's determination and persistence. His birth was the result of an unusual transaction between Leah and Rachel. Desperate to bear more children and maintain Jacob's attention, Leah traded some mandrakes, a plant believed to aid fertility, to Rachel in exchange for a night with their husband Jacob. When Leah conceived, she named her son Issachar, meaning reward or hire, reflecting her view that God had rewarded her perseverance and efforts. Issachar's story in the Bible is not filled with dramatic events, but his nature and the characteristics of his descendants are revealed through the blessings pronounced by Jacob and Moses. Jacob's blessing described Issachar as a strong donkey lying down between the sheepfolds. He saw that a resting place was good and that the land was pleasant, so he bowed his shoulder to bear burdens and became a servant at forced labor. This blessing paints a picture of Issachar as a tribe that is industrious and hardworking, willing to bear heavy burdens and serve others. The imagery of a strong donkey is symbolic of both strength and humility. It suggests that Issachar's descendants would value stability and the rewards of diligent labor over ambition and conquest. They were content to work the land and serve the needs of the people, making practical decisions that would benefit the tribe in the long run. Unlike the warlike tribes, Issachar preferred to focus on domestic prosperity and peaceful coexistence. However, Jacob's blessing also carries a note of caution. The reference to becoming a servant at forced labor hints at a potential downside to Issachar's nature, an inclination to sacrifice freedom for the sake of comfort and security. This characteristic would become apparent in their later history, as the tribe of Issachar often found itself serving under stronger tribes or external powers. Their contentment could sometimes lead to complacency, making them susceptible to domination. Yet, Issachar's tribe was also known for wisdom and understanding of the times. Moses' blessing over Issachar emphasized their scholarly nature, stating, "They shall summon peoples to the mountain. There they offer sacrifices of righteousness." Issachar's descendants were seen as people of insight and discernment, known for producing wise leaders and scholars who contributed to the spiritual and intellectual growth of Israel. They were often consulted for guidance and judgment, embodying a blend of physical strength and mental acuity. Issachar's story, therefore, is one of balance, strength coupled with humility, service paired with wisdom. His tribe was a stabilizing force in Israel, a group that valued hard work, knowledge, and the pursuit of righteousness. Zebulun, the 10th son of Jacob and Leah, was born after Issachar, and his name, which means dwelling or honor, was chosen by Leah as a statement of hope that Jacob would now honor her for bearing him 6 sons. While Zebulun's personal story is not heavily detailed in the Bible, his destiny and the role of his tribe are hinted at through the blessings he received from both Jacob and Moses. Jacob's blessing describes Zebulun's future in terms of trade and maritime pursuits. Zebulun shall dwell at the shore of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon. This blessing indicates that Zebulun's descendants would be associated with the sea, engaging in trade and commerce. The tribe would become known for its mercantile activities, capitalizing on its strategic location near the coast. This seafaring connection set Zebulun apart from many of the other tribes, whose focus was primarily on agriculture and livestock. Zebulun's proximity to the sea and the trade routes gave them opportunities for wealth and influence. His descendants were not just farmers but also skilled traders who dealt with various peoples. They played a crucial role in connecting Israel to the outside world, bringing in goods and resources that were otherwise difficult to obtain. The reference to Sidon, a prominent Phoenician city, suggests that Zebulun's territory extended into areas that facilitated interactions with other nations, making them a key player in the economic life of Israel. Moses' blessing for Zebulun reinforced this theme, stating, "Rejoice, Zebulun, in your going out, and Issachar, in your tents." This blessing celebrated Zebulun's adventurous spirit and commercial success, highlighting the complementary relationship between Zebulun and Issachar. While Issachar preferred to remain settled and focused on agricultural pursuits, Zebulun thrived in the excitement of trade and exploration. Together, the two tribes represented a balance between stability and expansion, local growth and international trade. Zebulun's legacy, though quieter compared to some of his brothers, is one of enterprise and opportunity. His descendants embraced the challenges of the sea and the risks of commerce, bringing prosperity and honor to their tribe. Through their ventures, Zebulun's people contributed to Israel's economic stability and served as a bridge between the landlocked tribes and the wider world. Their role as merchants and traders made them invaluable, not only for the goods they provided, but also for the connections they established. Joseph, the 11th son of Jacob and the firstborn of Rachel, was born into a family dynamic that was already fraught with rivalry, jealousy, and favoritism. Unlike his brothers, who were the sons of Leah, Zilpah, and Bilhah, Joseph's birth represented a moment of immense joy for Jacob, as Rachel, the wife he loved most, had been barren for many years. Because of his mother's long struggle to have children, Joseph was cherished and deeply loved by Jacob. This favoritism became immediately evident and was a source of constant tension among the brothers. From a young age, Joseph stood out among his siblings, not only because of Jacob's clear preference for him, but also due to his character and dreams that set him apart. Jacob's affection was displayed openly when he gave Joseph a richly ornamented robe, often referred to as the coat of many colors. This extravagant gift became a physical symbol of Jacob's favoritism, provoking feelings of bitterness and resentment among his older brothers. The robe was more than just a piece of clothing. It was a sign of authority and special status, suggesting that Joseph was being groomed for leadership despite being one of the youngest. The situation was further inflamed by Joseph's dreams. As a teenager, Joseph began to have vivid dreams that foretold a future where he would rise to a position of great authority and his family would bow down to him. In one dream, he saw sheaves of grain, each representing one of his brothers, bowing to his own upright sheaf. In another, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed before him, symbolizing his father, mother, and brothers. When Joseph shared these dreams with his family, it only served to deepen his brothers' hatred for him. To them, it was the height of arrogance for the younger brother to claim that he would one day rule over them. Even Jacob, who loved Joseph dearly, was taken aback and rebuked him for the implications of his dreams, though inwardly he pondered what they might mean. As tensions escalated, the brothers' jealousy reached a boiling point. One day, when Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers as they tended their flocks far from home, they saw an opportunity to rid themselves of the dreamer once and for all. As Joseph approached wearing his distinctive robe, the brothers conspired against him. "Here comes that dreamer," they sneered. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these pits and say that a wild animal devoured him." But Reuben, the eldest, intervened, convincing them not to kill Joseph outright, but to throw him into a pit instead, secretly planning to rescue him later. However, while Reuben was away, Judah proposed a new plan. Rather than leaving Joseph to die, they should sell him to a group of Ishmaelite traders passing by. This way, they would be rid of him without shedding blood, and they could make a profit as well. The other brothers agreed, and Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver, betrayed by his own flesh and blood. They stripped him of his beloved robe and handed him over to the traders, who took him down to Egypt as a slave. With Joseph gone, the brothers concocted a cruel lie. They dipped his robe in goat's blood and brought it to their father Jacob, asking him to identify it. "We found this. Is it your son's robe?" they asked, feigning ignorance. Jacob immediately recognized it and was overcome with grief, believing that Joseph had been killed by a wild beast. His sorrow was so great that he refused to be comforted, declaring that he would go to his grave mourning his beloved son. Meanwhile, Joseph's life took a dramatic turn in Egypt. Sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, Joseph quickly proved himself to be a man of integrity, skill, and wisdom. Even as a slave, his abilities set him apart, and Potiphar entrusted him with the management of his entire household. But just as Joseph began to find a place for himself, disaster struck again. Potiphar's wife, captivated by Joseph's good looks and character, attempted to seduce him. When Joseph refused her advances, out of loyalty to both God and his master, she falsely accused him of assaulting her. Joseph was thrown into prison, seemingly abandoned and forgotten. Yet, even in prison, Joseph's steadfastness and faith did not waver. He found favor with the prison warden, who put him in charge of the other prisoners. It was during this time that Joseph's gift for interpreting dreams came to light. He correctly interpreted the dreams of two of Pharaoh's officials, the cupbearer and the baker, who had been imprisoned. For the cupbearer, Joseph predicted restoration to his position, while for the baker, he foretold execution. Both prophecies came to pass exactly as Joseph had said. Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him when he was restored, hoping for deliverance from his unjust imprisonment. However, the cupbearer forgot about Joseph, leaving him in prison for 2 more long years. But God had not forgotten Joseph. When Pharaoh himself began to have troubling dreams that none of his wise men could interpret, the cupbearer finally remembered Joseph. He told Pharaoh about the young Hebrew man in prison who had correctly interpreted his own dream. Pharaoh summoned Joseph, and in a single day, his life changed forever. Joseph listened as Pharaoh described his dreams of 7 healthy cows being devoured by 7 gaunt ones, and 7 plump ears of grain being swallowed up by 7 thin ones. With God's guidance, Joseph interpreted the dreams. 7 years of abundance would be followed by 7 years of severe famine throughout the land. Impressed by Joseph's wisdom and insight, Pharaoh appointed him as second in command over all of Egypt. Joseph, once a slave and prisoner, was now given authority to oversee the collection and storage of grain during the years of plenty and to manage the distribution during the years of famine. He was given a new name, Zaphanath-Paneah, and married Asenath, the daughter of a prominent Egyptian priest. His new position brought wealth, honor, and power, yet Joseph remained humble and faithful to God. When the famine finally struck, it reached beyond Egypt to the land of Canaan, where Jacob and his remaining sons were struggling to survive. Hearing that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob sent his sons to buy food, unaware that the powerful Egyptian official they would bow before was none other than their long-lost brother, Joseph. Joseph recognized his brothers immediately, but they did not know him. Rather than revealing his identity, Joseph tested them, wanting to see if they had changed since the day they sold him into slavery. Through a series of encounters, Joseph put his brothers through trials that mirrored their earlier mistreatment of him, all while hiding his true identity. When he finally saw that they were truly repentant, especially Judah, who offered himself as a slave in place of their youngest brother, Benjamin, Joseph could no longer contain his emotions. He revealed himself, saying, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt." Overcome with shock and fear, the brothers were silent, expecting harsh retribution. But Joseph, in a remarkable act of forgiveness, reassured them. "Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life." Instead of seeking vengeance, Joseph saw the greater purpose behind his suffering. God had used his betrayal and trials to position him to save his family and countless others during the famine. Joseph's story is one of the most powerful illustrations of God's providence, the triumph of character over adversity, and the beauty of forgiveness. He rose from the depths of betrayal and imprisonment to the heights of power and influence, remaining faithful to God through every trial. His ability to forgive his brothers, despite the pain they caused him, stands as a testament to the power of grace and the belief that God can turn even the worst situations into something good. Joseph's blessing, however, stood out among all his brothers. Joseph is a fruitful vine near a spring, whose branches climb over a wall, because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, because of the shepherd, the rock of Israel. The blessings of your father are greater than the blessings of the ancient mountains, than the bounty of the age-old hills. Let all these rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. Joseph's life of suffering and triumph was honored with a blessing of unparalleled favor. His descendants, through Ephraim and Manasseh, would become 2 powerful tribes, receiving a double portion of inheritance. Benjamin, the 12th and youngest son of Jacob, was born under circumstances that were both joyful and heartbreaking. As the second son of Rachel, Jacob's most beloved wife, Benjamin's birth was meant to be a fulfillment of Rachel's deepest longing. Rachel had previously borne Joseph, and Benjamin's birth should have been a moment of triumph for her. But Rachel's joy quickly turned to tragedy, as she experienced a difficult and ultimately fatal labor. With her last breath, she named her newborn son Ben-Oni, meaning son of my sorrow. However, Jacob, overwhelmed by grief but determined to honor Rachel's memory in a positive way, renamed him Benjamin, which means son of my right hand. This name change signified both Jacob's sorrow and his hope that Benjamin would hold a place of strength and favor in his heart. As the youngest in a large family, Benjamin grew up in a house already marked by jealousy, betrayal, and pain. He never knew his mother, Rachel, whose death during his birth created a void that could never be filled. Instead, Benjamin was raised amidst the lingering grief of his father and the complicated dynamics between his older brothers. He became a symbol of both love and loss, a living reminder of Rachel, the wife Jacob cherished above all others. This connection made Benjamin exceptionally dear to Jacob, even more so after the presumed death of Joseph, Rachel's firstborn. Losing Joseph devastated Jacob, and as a result, Benjamin, the only remaining son of Rachel, became Jacob's most precious child. His protective love for Benjamin was intense, and he kept the boy close to him, refusing to let him travel far or take any unnecessary risks. This special status caused no resentment from Benjamin's brothers, for by the time he was born, the family dynamics had shifted dramatically. After Joseph's departure and Jacob's inconsolable grief, the brothers saw the toll that favoritism had taken and did not direct their jealousy toward Benjamin. In fact, Benjamin's youth and innocence garnered the brothers' sympathy and affection. He was not a participant in their earlier treachery against Joseph, and because of this, he became a unifying figure within the fractured family. In a way, Benjamin represented the hope of healing and restoration, a chance for the brothers to protect rather than betray their own blood. When the severe famine struck years later and Jacob's family faced starvation, Benjamin's place in the family became the focal point of an emotional and dramatic confrontation. The brothers were sent to Egypt to buy grain, unaware that the powerful Egyptian governor they would encounter was none other than their long-lost brother, Joseph. When Joseph recognized them but did not reveal his identity, he accused them of being spies and demanded they bring their youngest brother to prove their honesty. This demand struck fear into the brothers' hearts, for they knew that returning without Benjamin was not an option. Jacob would never allow his youngest son to make the perilous journey. Upon their return to Canaan, the brothers relayed Joseph's demand to their father. The very mention of sending Benjamin to Egypt filled Jacob with dread. He cried out in anguish, "You have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me." To Jacob, Benjamin was more than just his youngest son. He was the embodiment of all that remained of Rachel's memory and love. The thought of losing Benjamin was unbearable, and he flatly refused the request. It was only when the famine worsened and starvation loomed that Jacob reluctantly agreed to send Benjamin, swayed by Judah's solemn promise to bear responsibility for the boy's safety. When the brothers arrived in Egypt, Benjamin's presence changed everything. Joseph, still concealing his identity, was overwhelmed at the sight of his only full brother, the son of his beloved mother. Benjamin, who had been a mere child when Joseph was sold into slavery, stood before him as a young man, innocent and unaware of the tumultuous history that had scarred the family. Joseph's emotions were stirred deeply, and he ordered a feast to be prepared for his brothers. In an act that surprised and bewildered them, Joseph seated them according to their birth order and gave Benjamin 5 times as much food as the others. This special treatment of Benjamin was not intended to provoke envy, but to test his brothers' reactions and see if they would once again fall prey to jealousy as they had with Joseph years before. But the greatest test was yet to come. After filling their sacks with grain, Joseph secretly placed his own silver cup in Benjamin's bag. As the brothers departed for home, Joseph sent his steward after them, accusing them of stealing the cup. The brothers, confident of their innocence, offered to become Joseph's slaves if the cup was found among them. But when the cup was discovered in Benjamin's sack, their horror was complete. Tearing their clothes in grief, they returned to Joseph's palace, pleading for mercy. It was at this moment that Judah, who had sworn to protect Benjamin, stepped forward and offered himself as a substitute. "Now, therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a slave to my lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers," he pleaded. This self-sacrificial offer revealed the depth of Judah's transformation and his commitment to protecting Benjamin at any cost. Joseph, seeing his brother's genuine remorse and love for Benjamin, could no longer contain his emotions. He sent everyone out of the room and, weeping loudly, revealed his true identity. "I am Joseph? Is my father still alive?" Stunned and terrified, the brothers were speechless, but Joseph reassured them, embracing Benjamin and weeping on his neck. After so many years of pain and separation, the sight of these two brothers reunited was a moment of healing for the family. Benjamin finally rebuilt the bridge between Joseph and his brothers, allowing the family to reconcile and come together once more. Though he plays a relatively passive role, Benjamin's story is essential to the narrative of Jacob's family. His presence brought out the best in his brothers, revealing their growth and capacity for repentance. Unlike Joseph, who was separated from his family and forged his path in a foreign land, Benjamin remained a constant source of love and hope for Jacob. His innocence and vulnerability were a reminder of what the brothers had lost through their jealousy and hatred, and what they could regain through forgiveness and unity. In the end, Benjamin was not only the beloved youngest son, but also the catalyst for the restoration of his family. His life, spared by the brothers' commitment and Joseph's grace, became a symbol of the possibility of a new beginning. Though Benjamin's story may lack the dramatic ups and downs of his older brothers, his role as the precious, protected son was instrumental in the reconciliation and preservation of Jacob's family. The blessing of Benjamin. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey, in the evening he divides the plunder. This blessing hinted at a tribe known for fierce warriors, capable of both aggression and conquest. Benjamin's descendants would be formidable in battle, but this ferocity would also lead to internal conflicts that would nearly destroy the tribe. Through blessings and trials, betrayal and redemption, God used each son's strengths and weaknesses to build the foundation of a nation that would bear his name and carry his promise. Each son, flawed yet significant, contributed to the tapestry of a people chosen to bring light to the world. Their stories remind us that no path is too crooked, no heart too hardened, and no mistake too great for God to transform into something beautiful and purposeful. So, as we reflect on the lives of these men and their place in the grand story of the Bible, let their legacies challenge and inspire us. Are we using our strengths and gifts for a higher purpose? Are we allowing our past failures to define us, or are we choosing redemption and growth? Whether we see ourselves in the turbulent passion of Reuben, the fierce zeal of Levi, or the enduring faith of Joseph, the message is clear. God can take the broken pieces of our lives and weave them into his greater story. If you've been moved by this journey through the lives of Jacob's sons, don't let it end here. Take a moment to like this video, share it with others who hunger for deeper understanding, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. Your engagement allows us to continue exploring these timeless truths and helps build a community committed to studying and living out the Word of God. Join us in uncovering more biblical wisdom that can shape our lives today. Together, let's delve deeper, learn more, and apply these lessons to our own journeys of faith. Click subscribe and become part of a family that seeks to grow in wisdom and truth, just as the 12 sons grew into a nation that changed the world.